I'm one of those repeated, how do you say, suspects who shows up at these events. This is number 3, I think, so thank you also for having me and wanting me back. And governance. When we think about governance, the main idea is that a citizens' assembly doesn't usually happen on its own. And we need the people, we need the structures for it to make it happen. And as we saw yesterday in the introductory slide with Eva's building blocks, and I stole those for later, we have this question that we ask: what do we need to make an assembly happen? Because, as my first slide says, no assembly governs itself. There's always some kind of sense of people involved, and those people, they can also not run itself. They have to work together in teams to make it happen. So the first questions, and by the way, there's several questions that I'm going to sort of ask along the way, and I'm going to end up with 3 that I'll let you discuss about. It's like, what kind of structures do we need? What kind of teams do we need? And who do we need to involve? Like, who is it that needs to be part of this governance? Because when we say governance, it can mean everything and anything. But essentially, since assemblies don't run themselves on their own, we need to start thinking about the details of who needs to be involved. And in the last FIDE school in Helsinki, I held a workshop on governance and brought together sort of people in the room, and we discussed, what does governance mean for you? Like, what is the basis of it? And some of them said that it was structures, like, you know, the decision-making body, but some of them also sort of reflected on the principles of governance, like what is behind all of this. So this is sort of just a word cloud of all the responses that they made. The bigger, the more present. It can be about making decisions. Who makes decisions on, you know, the table structures? Who makes decisions on the timeline? Who makes decisions on the final implementation? The structure elements also featured very prominently in order to give the process sort of the anchor points on who takes care of what elements of it. And then there's smaller parts like the action, policy, process, mandate. All of this also feeds into governance. But then you have things like accountability of implementation, design for integrity, or care of people. All of these elements also feature prominently. So when we think about governance, and I'm just looking at the phone because my notes are in my phone, when we think about governance, we essentially can think of it in 2 ways. We can think of governance as being a very detailed roadmap on how you should do things, like a how-to-do guide. Or you can think of it, on the other hand, as a set of loose principles that you want to implement, or something in between. Now, both have their pros and cons, but in essence, governance must adapt to the situation where it's applied. That's the key thing. In some cases, you would want a detailed roadmap. In other cases, you can work with a set of principles. Now, where does which kind of governance work best? This is what I'm gonna talk about a little bit, go through the case of the Citizens' Assembly that was held in Mostar in 2021, where we set up a fairly detailed roadmap and a governance structure that had a lot of elements to it, which we didn't always use. So there's some good examples there, there's some bad examples, well, not bad, but things that might have been too much, and we'll go through all of these. So the city of Mostar experienced heavy fighting during the war in the 1990s. The Citizens' Assembly there was held less than 30 years after the conflict. It was the first Citizens' Assembly in all of the country and in all of Southeastern Europe. So it was something new. It was a new kind of process that was held there. The symbol of the city, the old bridge in Mostar, was shelled and destroyed during the war. The front line ran through the city. You had 2 sides which were defined by their religious groups, which essentially did not work together. The city, while we were designing it, did not have elections for 12 years. They did not have a legitimate government for 8 years. So essentially, you're working in a democratic wasteland. You could call it that way. Now, this assembly, it was initiated by the Council of Europe at that time with an attempt to bring citizens back into decision-making. Because they could not use regular democratic procedures, this was an attempt to use democratic innovations to substitute for this. During the design process, luckily, we got that city government somehow elected. It was a political agreement, so we, in the end, had somebody to work with from the other side. This assembly, these are the people there, and Eve showed you the slide yesterday already. I'm stealing pictures, by the way, from all of you. The Citizens Assembly was co-convened by the Council of Europe and the city of Mostar. The mayor of Mostar signed the invitation letter, and I already mentioned to someone through the recruitment process, it's a smallish city, it's 100,000 people. Every 10th household got a letter. His mother got a letter. She could not participate due to our governance structure saying that she's ineligible to do that. So again, small rules. These are the people there that were chosen to participate. There were several elements that we took into account, except for age and gender. It was the ethnicity, which is based on religion of the people, which was highly relevant. We also took into account education and employment status and the part of the city where they come from, so that you would have equal representation of more urban and less urban areas and suburbs within the city itself. As a process, it followed sort of the regular structure of plenary sort of learning. It happened over 4 weekends, a total of 6 days, and involved 47 people, if I'm not mistaken. 47 people. I'm trying to remember those numbers because it's early in the morning, sorry. So, 47 people over 6 days, 4 weekends, and in the end they came up with 32 recommendations. These 32 recommendations tackled the issue of city cleanliness and maintenance of public spaces. That was their problem. And by the way, the topic, it was also chosen inclusively. I'll come back to that at the end. City cleanliness was an issue for Mostar because of the dysfunctionality of government and simply because trash collection was not doing its job. There were 3 companies supposed to do the job, divided by the ethnic groups which were present in the city, and no one was really doing it very well. That was noticeable to everyone. So if you have seen any images of Naples with its trash sort of burgs, or Paris with, trash in the streets, that's how Mostar looked like before the assembly. The 32 recommendations tackled that topic, but they also went a lot broader. So they included other topics as well, and this is what we mentioned to some of you, that during the selection of the remedy, even if you try to keep it fairly narrow, you can expect citizens to add on to this. So one of the recommendations was to find ways to address corruption in the administration. Sounds reasonable, but it's not directly connected to the topic, or the building of a sports hall. The assembly, in its sort of process, came to be through a civic lottery. This was done with an external agency, a polling agency, who selected these 48 citizens were selected, 47 showed up. That's why there's a discrepancy there. Among the citizens of Mostar, through a 3-stage process, we sent out 5,000 letters, got responses, selected 2 panels, and then drew 1 panel of those 2 to be present in the room. The topic and remit was decided inclusively, and I'll add a link to the article that Eve and I wrote on how this happened, so I won't go into detail on this. Basically, the citizens got to select what they wanted to discuss. The Citizens Assembly was held over 6 days, the regular sort of stages of learning, deliberation, and voting on recommendations. The voting, by the way, we did it on a scale, so they could vote from 1 to 7 to how much they agreed on the topic that they wanted to discuss, and there was a threshold that needed to be passed in order for the recommendation to be adopted. 32 recommendations grouped into 5 thematic areas. And now you might sound, oh, this sounds fairly nice and fairly sort of well thought out, but did it actually work? And this is where the city council, the newly elected city council played a role. They voted on these recommendations and they basically decided to unanimously adopt an action plan to address all of them without knowing what was in the box, basically. So they tried to implement as many as possible. Some of them were outside of their competences to sort of work for final adaptation. In the meantime, as far as I've tracked, they have adopted around half of them, amongst which the most difficult one, which was to merge these trash collection companies. So now there's only one public utility company doing all of that in Mostar. They couldn't do it for 10 years, and this was a way of an impetus, well, not 10, 20, 25 years, and this was an impetus for them to do it. So, in this sense, I'm going to go through the structure that enabled all of this. And building blocks again. When we think of governance structures, there's certain elements that you would want to think of. As the building blocks here, you might need some of them to build your house or build your governance. You might not need all of them. And one of them, which is key, is this commissioning authority. Citizens' assemblies usually have somebody who stands behind them who can work with the recommendations that you end up producing through such an assembly. This commissioner, it can also be the sort of body who is financing the assembly, but does not have to. There can be a discrepancy there. The commissioner usually is the institution that sends out the invitation letter. This is what we sort of try to simplify in terms. The person or institution inviting citizens to participate. And it's an essential element. Another one is the so-called design team or project team. This group of people is usually the first to come together, sometimes even before you know who's going to commission the entire thing. And it consists of those individuals who will design the sort of main elements of the process, but not necessarily implement them. Because this is the organizing team or the operator. There can be sort of an overlap between the two, that the design team can become the organizing team as the process moves along. Or some parts of the design team can move to the organization, but again, it does not have to be the case. In Mostar, there was some overlap, but it wasn't fully clear, and I'll go through that governance structure in detail. A fourth element are facilitators, who are key to have in the room. Facilitators can also be part of the design team and the organizing team, but they don't have to. They can be external. They can be an external agency hired just for that one process. Now, another one, which is optional, is an information and expert selection team. The sort of group who would select the experts who will talk to citizens and try to teach them about the topic. This can happen within either the design team or the organizing team, but it can also happen completely independently. Most of all, it's dependent on the sensitivity of the topic, on the size of the assembly, and on resources. You'll see in the end it all comes down basically also to resources. A communications team can also be separate or outsourced. And communications is an important element in this because running an assembly and not essentially having anyone know that it happened, yeah, that doesn't really give much weight to all of this being implemented. If you are doing such a process together with a level of administration, you can usually rely on their communications team because they have it within their administration. But you might need to coach them on what, how, and when you want the communication to happen. And finally, and this is proven to be quite relevant is some kind of oversight. Not necessarily that you would need it, but it gives credibility to the process. The oversight team is one element that was heavily emphasized in the Mostar Assembly, both in its composition and in its role, but also in its publicity. In the French assemblies, you have the guarantors of that assembly, who are also like figureheads who are publicly visible in front of the assembly during the process as it happens, and also afterwards they write about how it went. There can also be an arbitration procedure. We had a very detailed one for the case of Mostar because of the sensitivity of the place that we did not need to use in the end. And in the subsequent assemblies, we basically did not adopt an arbitration procedure. Arbitration, it's a process where you would run into a roadblock, that the assembly would not be able to function because there is a disagreement between especially the organizing team and, for example, the commissioner, or the organizing team and the facilitators, that there's a disagreement on how to move forward. Usually starts with a complaint filed to the oversight board that the design team or organizing team are not doing their job correctly. And that initiates a procedure to try to resolve this. So how did this sort of, oh, and implementation, sorry. The one thing you usually forget. Graham will tell us more about that. Implementation, basically, who is responsible for this, you need to know. It's a part of the governance structure to know who will do what with the recommendations in the end. And especially who is going to track implementation, if it is even possible. As we've seen in the introductory slide, when a process is over, mostly it's over. There's nothing following up on it. But that does not mean that it's not possible to build it into the government structure from the start, at least for a small grace period of 1 year or 1.5 years to get implementation tracking going. So it can be built in, especially if you're working with permanent administrations in cities, in municipalities, at the national level. You can build an implementation saying that this office or this person will track what has been happening with the results, with the recommendations of the assembly for the next 18 months. That's a possibility to build it into your governance structure as well. So, I know it's tiny, you will get the slides. So, does it work? Pointer? A little bit. So, up here are the co-commissioning bodies. This is the City of Mostar and the Council of Europe. I should have made this font a little larger, by the way. Sorry about that. The co-commissioning bodies are the ones that gave the mandate to run the assembly and the money to run the assembly. So there was sort of a mismatch there, that the Council of Europe had the funds available and the willingness to do this, and the City of Mostar was needed in order to get the implementation going, in order to give legitimacy to the process as well. Both of them gave the mandate to the design team. Now, the design team sounds very abstract, but essentially this was Marcin Gerwin, Yves de Jager, Damir Kapidžić, and 2 people from the Council of Europe office in Sarajevo. That was the design team. All of us worked on writing the rule book. Marcin Gerwin wrote the rule book. I'm telling you the names of the people because it makes things less abstract. You can essentially point to individuals who did this job. Define a timeline. This was Marcin and Yves for the most part. Design topic selection. This was Marcin and me and Yves. Design recruitment. This was Yves and me. Select facilitators. Who selected facilitators? This was Marcin, I think, for the most part. Co-design the agenda. This was all of us together. Again, Marcin did a large job of that. Yves did a large job of that. I did a little less on co-designing the agenda part. And the Council of Europe helped us. Those 2 people helped us with all of these tasks. Now, within all of this, the design team essentially, while writing the rule book, became the coordinating team, where we also got on board a few more people from the Council of Europe to help us with coordination. And in the end, it was, I think, 4 of them. And Eve and Marcin took a lesser role when it came to the coordination part in the end. This was conducting the recruitment, sort of creating a tender for a polling agency and letting it run the recruitment process. The Council of Europe did a lot of that part. Recruiting stakeholders, this was me and the Council of Europe going through lists of people who you could reach out to from civil society, academia, trying to get as many people on board because you needed those stakeholders for the oversight team. Selecting experts, and again, this was a mix of the City of Mostar people, the Council of Europe people, and myself going through a selection of experts, a list of experts, and trying to match them to the topics that we needed to cover, and seeing how they would, well, first of all, how it would fit their agenda, and how we could actually bring them into the room, if possible. One thing I may forgot to mention, this was 2021. And I don't know what you were doing in 2021, but most of the world was either in lockdown or with masks. The assembly happened because of a lucky break during the summer of 2021, so before Omicron, again, closed everything down. Co-designing the agenda, this was done sort of throughout the entire period, and this is where Eve and Marcin were also involved. Conducting the final vote, this is, again, something the coordinating team was responsible for, and this was the Council of Europe people doing most of that. Online visibility, this was Council of Europe plus the City of Mostar, and writing the final report, which again was in the responsibility of the Council of Europe and the City of Mostar. So all of this sort of tells you that the design team is there from the beginning to set up how the process works, the guidelines for the process. Coordinating team or implementation team is there to make it happen. But what's this thing here, the oversight team? What's their role? Effectively, their role is to make sure that the process does not violate the rule book and that the process does not run into any problems, but also it gives it legitimacy. The oversight team in practice met only twice. Once to institute, sort of to get together, to learn about the process and what their role is, and the second to learn how it went and to give sort of an okay, like, are you satisfied with how this went? To have a discussion, I'll come back to that, to have a discussion and then to see, are there any elements that you would sort of want to have more information on or that you would want to highlight. So the oversight team was selected by these coordinators here, and it consisted of several parts. The most important element is to have as many stakeholders as you can in that oversight team. So the first element you want to have is people from political parties. They were the ones who you needed to have on board in the process to be able to implement those recommendations. So the oversight team had a look, the coordination team had a look at the City Council of Mostar, this newly elected City Council, and from every party, we asked the parties to come up with one representative. Every party represented in the City Council essentially had one seat in the oversight team. Both the government and the opposition were involved. No discrimination there. If you had a seat on the City Council, you had a seat on the oversight team. Now, to balance this out, and the mayor's office, sort of in front of the administration, also had one seat on the oversight team. Now, to balance out this political side, you wanted to bring in the civil society side, or the civic side as well. And this is where we reached out to as many civil society organizations as we could find in Mostar. And Mostar is a sort of 100,000 people big city, but there's not a lot of civil society who is involved in this kind of work. So it really took an effort to get them in the room there. We ended up with, I think, 8 civil society representatives as part of the oversight team. Their composition, by the way, it's all public. You can find their mini bios also online. So it's not like a hidden body that meets in a dark room. You know these people, and it's publicly available who they are. The oversight team also included 2 representatives from the universities that are present in Mostar as neutral arbitrars, so to say. In case there's sort of a mismatch between the political side and the civil society side, they would sort of give some input. And the Council of Europe also wanted to be part of it, so yeah, they also got a seat. Again, it's about including as many stakeholders as possible because their role is to give legitimacy to the process in case something unexpected happens. So to monitor the compliance of the process, to review violations, to call on either the design or the coordinating team to restore compliance with the principles of the process. They are the ones who initiate arbitration, if needed. They also oversee recruitment, so they are informed about how the recruitment process went. They review appeals, and if there are any requests for external observers, they're the ones who are appointing them or approving their presence in the room during deliberation. One thing I forgot to mention, the design team is also responsible. This is sort of the main responsibilities for the Assembly rulebook, which gives the main elements of the process. The coordinating team is responsible for getting the Assembly participants together and the course of the Assembly, sort of what happens. And the oversight team is responsible for the arbitration mechanism. Again, you'll get this slide. There's a lot of sort of information here. But the essence of it is that you need somebody who is commissioning. These are the main building blocks, if you remember the previous slide here. You need somebody who's commissioning. You need somebody who's designing the process, somebody who's implementing the process, and then, again, you need somebody who's overseeing the entire process. I don't know if you see which elements are missing here. If you do have a contested topic, ideally you would want a separate body charged with selecting the information. You said media and communications, exactly. So that was something that, in the end, was the sort of additional responsibility of the Council of Europe people who worked together with the city of Mostar. So they took that part over because we did not have a separate body task just for that. Anything else? The follow-up was not part of the governance process per se. It was not included in it. But yeah, essentially, all of these 3 teams, they stopped existing when the Assembly was over. And the follow-up sort of was ensured through this sort of working together of the co-commissioning bodies. If there was only one commissioning body, it probably wouldn't have happened. But since there were 2 who could sort of check upon each other on what you're doing, are you going to give us the money? Did you write that report? You know, that sort of thing. You could actually have a more decent follow-up. What's also missing here is the facilitation. Facilitators were not heavily involved in the process itself. In subsequent processes, and what you would usually want is for facilitators to be part of this team already, or to be a separate team on their own who have input into the course of the Assembly, into designing the agenda, which is natural, which you would want. We did not have it in this process. So those are some elements. Again, no governance process will ever be perfect. There's no single governance process that you could take, copy, paste, and implement and expect it to work seamlessly. This one was designed for a very particular reason, to look this way, with a very heavy oversight, arbitration sort of side to it, and a little less sort of focus on these elements, the communication element, the information element, and the facilitation. So numbers 4, 5, and 6. Just because we needed a proof of concept, can it work? It was the first assembly held in a post-conflict setting ever. meaning post-war setting. It was the first assembly held in that part of Europe at all. So it was designed with a purpose. And any assembly that you run also needs to be designed with a purpose. So I'll give you a reflection to think about all of these kind of building blocks, and then we can move into the Q&A afterward.